Thank you again, Konstantin. I appreciate you setting up this conversation today that we're having with, as you pointed out, Barney Spender, the director, co-director of Road to Sparta, and Dean Karnazes, one of the four runners in the race that took place in 2014. Barney Spender is a veteran sports journalist. He's lived and worked in Athens from 2004 to 2009. He went to Greece initially to cover the Athens Olympics. So that's how we got introduced. I was there on a visit in 2006, and we crossed paths and have stayed friends ever since. And so this was a pleasure finally to get to talk to Barney about the film, and it's an honor that we're showing it, and it's part of our March series of films that we're showing. And just as important, we have Dean Karnazes to speak to as well. And Dean is superhuman, what they call an ultramarathoner. He wrote a book about that 16 years ago. He's a professional runner. He runs for a living. That's his day job. Dean is quite an extraordinary person when you consider all the races that he's been in, and we don't have time to go through all of it in particular, but we're here to talk specifically about the Spartathlon. But I should mention, Dean did run across the Death Valley, which is in a 135-mile race in 130-degree temperatures. That alone is an incredible feat. He's also run a marathon in the South Pole in minus 45-degree temperatures. He's run a marathon on all 7 continents, not once, but twice. And, just as astonishing as he ran a 350-mile race without stopping. And so that's just some preview of the kinds of races that Dean has competed in. And of course, we'll get into the challenges and his experiences in the Spartathlon. Barney, I'm going to start with you and have you just give us a quick history of the Spartathlon, its origins as a foot race, and let us know what it was that prompted you to actually do a documentary on the race itself.
Well, hi George. As they say in Greece, Yassas, Yamas, and Kalimera to anyone who's listening, and thanks for joining us for this, and thank you, George, for getting us involved in this great festival. It's brilliant. I really appreciate it. I'm so glad that we've got a chance to play to a wide audience. This is a film, as you know. I mean, with the film you did, Swing Away, that it has a very long gestation period. I think yours was about 9 years. This wasn't quite so long, but my first inklings of making this film, I suppose, were when I was working for Athens International Radio in Greece, around about 2005, 2006, when someone asked me if I knew of the race, and I had never heard of it. Now, I'd actually run the Athens Classic Marathon in 2002. And when I did that, I was very pumped up. It was an amazing race to run, and I loved that mixture of sport and history, running together and imagining the plains of marathon. The Athens Marathon starts at Marathon and ends in the Kalimamaro Stadium in Athens, and to finish in there is just the most sensational feeling that an amateur sportsman can have. So I was very pumped up. I was very excited about the fact that I had run with Pheidippides, and I had recreated this run myself. And then, of course, I discovered about Spartathlon and started reading about it and read Herodotus and discovered that everything I thought I knew about the marathon was essentially a 19th century invention built on some satirical writings, I think of the 2nd century AD, so about 500 or 600 years after the Battle of Marathon. I think it was Lucius was the writer who wrote this myth about Pheidippides running to Athens, saying we won, and then dropping dead. So that's all a myth. And when you go back to the Herodotus story, there's a brief mention of the runner, Pheidippides, being sent to Athens, being sent from Athens and arriving in Sparta the next day. And it was that line which was the inspiration for a guy called John Foden, who was an RAF officer in Britain. And he said, this cannot be possible. It's 153 miles. You can't possibly, a person cannot leave one place, run 153 miles and arrive the next day. It's got to take longer than that. So he thought he'd test it out. This was in the early 1980s. I think it was 1981. And 4 RAF officers did the run and proved that they could do it. I think they did it in about 39, 40 hours, something like that. The following year, 1982, this race, the Spartathlon, was born. So when I came into it, which was many years down the road, I'm a real newcomer to the Spartathlon. It just grabbed my imagination. I interviewed Scott Jurek, who I'm sure many of the Americans watching this will know. Scott Jurek. He's a fantastic runner, and I think he won the race 3 times. And I talked to others, and I covered it as a journalist, and it just filled me. This notion again of sport, which is I've been a sports journalist for 30 something years, and I suppose an amateur historian, or I have a background in theatre, in literature, and just this whole idea of bringing this story to the screen. Eventually it came through because no one would believe me. I was writing about it, I did radio pieces about this race, and still people wouldn't believe me. And so I thought the only way I can do it is to show people, and that is effectively how it all happened. That's how it happened. My wife, God bless her, she got bored of me going on and on about it, and eventually gave me the ultimatum, which was, Barney, you have a choice here. You can either make the film or shut up. And that was it. And from that moment, the film was going to be made.
So I want to ask Dean, when you first decided to run the Spartathlon, I know that you think of Pheidippides as a kindred spirit, kindred brother, and you write about him in your book. And so obviously it was, you know the history yourself, and I know before you actually, from what I understand, before you actually decided to enter the race, you tried to retrace his steps exactly so you could, on your own, it sounded like, want to run from Athens to Sparta, even if it meant you were off the paved roads, because I guess the Spartathlon is like 95% paved roads. You're obviously not running exactly where Pheidippides would have ran, but just tell us about your ties to the Spartathlon.
Well, in some ways it started with a professor at Cambridge, Dr. Paul Cartledge, who's one of the foremost authorities on ancient Greek culture. And in conversations with him and doing research for my book, he mentioned that a number of the locations on the actual route that Pheidippides followed are different than the Spartathlon. The Spartathlon's a close proximity, but there are different pathways. And I wanted to go see if they still existed, because these were kind of well-trodden pathways that the Romae or the Hemia of the Romae would follow, the ancient foot messengers. And I thought perhaps I could retrace those actual trails. And that was kind of my initial idea. But when I got to Greece and started doing my research, a lot of these trails were impossible to decipher. I couldn't tell if I was on a goat trail or if it was a legitimate trail. Some areas were pretty clear. There were still some like footbridges from ancient times that I was able to cross. And based on that kind of reconnaissance trip, I just realized that recreating his actual footsteps in a modern time would be impossible, because the ancient record is so sparse. Like Herodotus doesn't describe a lot of what Pheidippides did prior to the Battle of Marathon.
So how, out of curiosity, how far were you able to get before you decided that this is kind of a lost cause, it's not possible?
Yeah, well, getting out of Athens from the Acropolis, there's no way but to follow the highway, because Athens now is completely paved over. So for about the first, I would say almost a mega, it was on pavement. And then I got off the actual pavement, and I probably bushwhacked for about 70 kilometers in total over 3 days. And it was more scouting. I was running when I could, but mostly looking around, kind of backtracking and retracing some of my steps. But it was probably around 70 kilometers.
So Barney, I'll come back to you and want to ask you about your collaboration with your co-director, but just quickly, while we're on the subject with Dean, what could you tell us about the training that you did to prepare for the Spartathlon? I know, although it doesn't come up in the film, that you ran a 50-mile race just before, and so by the time you got to Athens, you weren't 100%. Obviously, I think you actually were sick, and whether it was flu or cold or whatever it was, you clearly were second guessing whether or not you should have did that 50-mile race before trying to take on the Spartathlon. But just talk quickly about like the training that you did to prepare for this kind of race.
Or the overtraining. So I had signed up for a number of races that I was kind of obligated to do prior to the Spartathlon for some of my sponsors. And when you get into race conditions like a 50-miler, myself, even though I'm saying it's going to be a training run, when people are passing you and kind of chiding you on, you always push yourself. So I wasn't completely recovered going into the Spartathlon, but in truth, I've done races like that before where I haven't been completely recovered. So it wasn't anything completely foreign to me. I think what was unique to me is just kind of being overwhelmed by the reception I received in Athens and in Greece in general, and kind of having people following me around a lot. I'm a kind of a private guy, and all of a sudden, I had like fans, and that was new. And trying to stay in my own head before running a pretty intense race, by all measures, a really intense race. I mean, one of the most intense and difficult ultramarathons on earth. You kind of want to have your game face on and go into it completely prepared. And I just felt like I wasn't really at my top, at my best when I went into the race. But like I said before, I've gone into other races in that same state.
Yeah, but on top of everything else, you also decided not to, to make it as authentic as possible. If you couldn't actually literally retrace his footsteps, you wanted to only consume the kinds of foods that and drink that would be available to him at back in 490 BC, right? So you were just eating dried fruits and curated meats and figs and that sort of thing. So, and only drinking water. So you no electrolytes, no power bars. So you would think that knowing that it's going to be, one of the most difficult ultramarathons that you've ever competed in, to then go into it knowing that you're going to sacrifice in this way, I would think you would have been more, you would have said, look, I don't want to do something like that because it's only going to make it even more difficult for me to try to finish.
Well, I mean, here's a shameless plug. I was researching my book, The Road to Sparta, and originally this book was going to be completely about the story of Pheidippides. So it was going to be kind of a historical fiction. And I wanted to kind of get into his headspace. And I thought, if I'm eating energy bars, and drinking Hammer Nutrition, heat, recovery drink, and using all these modern tools, these were not things he had access to. So I thought, I can't follow the actual pathway. Obviously, I can't run barefoot or in sandals because, like you said, it's 95% asphalt. But at least I could use the ancient foods that he used to kind of get a feel for what it's like covering that distance, which is to me still mind-boggling that in 2,500 years ago, a guy could run 153 miles, without a GPS watch, without reliable access to food. I mean, foraging along the way, without reliable access to water, with no headlamps to navigate at night, no ribbons to follow. So I wanted to try at least to feel some of what he felt by eating those same foods, if that makes sense.
So yes, it does. But, and of course we know that the next day he ran back to Athens. So only to add insult to misery. But so Barney, tell me about your collaboration with your co-director. I know you guys were students at Trinity College in Dublin, so you have a long history with him in theater. And I guess you weren't going to do this film without him. So tell us something about him, and then how it is that you two set out to make the movie. Like, where did you find the runners?
Well, I knew I wanted to make a film, but I'm a journalist and I'd never made a film in my life. So I knew what I wanted to do, but I didn't know how to do it. So I needed somebody who understood how to use a camera, basically, and how to, if I told him something, he would be able to do it for me, put it onto screen. And Roddy and I go back an awfully long time. We were students together. We did a lot of theatre together on stage, and we built a lot of sets together. We used to hang out. We used to drink a lot of beer. We used to try and chase girls. We drank beer more successfully than we chased girls, it has to be said. But, you know, you go through this. And it happened that, you know, when I was thinking about this, the field narrowed quite quickly as to who I would want to work with, or who I could trust with this. And I really, I mean, partly it was, I think partly, if I'm going to be truthful, it's partly an age thing. Getting to a certain age and having worked very hard all my life for different people and done different things, this was a private project. And Roddy and I had been to the funeral of a friend of ours from university who had just turned 50 and had died. And we were surrounded by familiar faces from our past, genuine old friends. And that feeling came to me, which was going that, you know, I don't know how long we've got. And actually, I like these guys and I want to work with people that I love dearly. And Roddy is one of my favorite people. And I said, Roddy, we come and do this. The worst thing that can happen, Roddy, is that you and I go to Greece, we drink beer, we unsuccessfully chase girls again, and we make a 10-minute film or a 20-minute film or something. I mean, that's it. That's the worst that can happen. And so on that premise, I persuaded him. And, you know, like everyone else had spoken to about Spartathlon, he didn't really believe me. He didn't believe, when I was putting these numbers in of 250 kilometers in 36 hours, he couldn't get it. And truthfully, it was only when he arrived in Athens and actually saw the race that the scales fell from his eyes and he went, Jesus, this is phenomenally brilliant. And suddenly Roddy was hooked in, and he was just outstanding. I mean, he's a great cameraman, and he had a good eye. And the nice thing is, because we knew each other, I could kind of tell him what I was looking for, and he understood what I wanted.
Where did you find Angela and Rob and Mark? You know, because the film profiles the four runners, Dean, of course,
yeah.
And then we have, and we'll talk about this later when we get to the poetry and how those sonnets were intended to sort of honor Pheidippides as the fifth runner in the race. But tell us about where you found the runners.
Yeah, and that's a very good point. We should, you know, there are four runners involved, and they were fantastic. And I think we always joked that we were being blessed by Pan during the whole course of the making of this film, because things that have happened have turned out very serendipitously throughout. Somebody has been looking after us from above. I contacted Mark Woolley, first of all, simply through Facebook. I had no idea where to start. I didn't know any Spartathlon runners. And I found he had a blog. He had a tattoo of Pheidippides on his leg as a finisher and so on. And I just got in touch. And Mark is he's a Brit. He lives in Spain. He's a teacher out there, and he's a really good guy. I mean, I was lucky with my first call fell on fertile ground, if you like. And he said, well, look, I'm running it. I'm helping this guy, Rob Pinnington, to run it. And Rob is another Brit who's based in Germany. And I liked the idea of having people dotted around, not just all stuck in one place. I knew I wanted a female runner. So I got in touch with a friend of mine, a Greek friend of mine who's a runner, and she put me in touch with Angie. And then so we had 3 runners. And then I had a chat with a bloke called George Stephanopoulos in New York about this idea, because George and I had been, do you know, you may have come across him, I don't know. He was making a film at the same time, and we'd been chatting a lot about that, called Swing Away. Very good film, go and watch it, after Road to Sparta, obviously. And George, you mentioned to me Dean's name and said, do you know this guy? And I, rather ignorantly, because I am an ignorant man when it comes to these things, said, no, I don't think I did. So we had a chat. You gave me his contact details, and I looked up Dean and thought, well, that would work. At which point I picked up the phone to Dean, and we had a conversation, Dean. And
well, I'm going to just jump in for a second, because it's a credit to Dean, because I didn't know Dean, and I just other than saying hello to him in Chicago, but I knew enough to know that he would take your call, and really my suggestion was just to talk to him, because I had just read the Ultramarathon Man, so I was familiar with you, Dean, and I came across that book in Barnes and Noble, by the way, and saw the cover, and and when I opened and I was running a lot at the time, so was interested in the book, but didn't know that anything about you. When I looked, when I read the insert and realized you're, of course he's Greek American, Dean Karnazes. In fact, in the film, you had to, at one point in one of the stops, you had to remind the people, hey, I'm Karnazes, I'm Greek. That's got to count for something, and just to be cheered on. So that was great. But again, you reached out and you got a hold of Dean, and it just so happened, Dean, I think that you were, registered to run the race that same time. So the stars aligned, as they say.
Well, I mean, in truth,
it was the good gold pan.
In truth, and Barney contacted me, I was a little, hesitant to get involved, because I get contacted by a lot of people. Obviously I'd never met Barney. I didn't know anything about his backstory. I did as best to research as I could. But even during the Spartathlon, in the pre-race and post-race interviews, I was really concerned. I thought, I don't want to be part of a shitty film. I'll be frank. I mean, I was so afraid that here I'm going to spend this time with this guy, and he's going to put out this ridiculous film. It's going to have my name associated with it. Do I even want to be part of this? And when Barney sent me the finished product to watch, my parents happened to be in town with me, and I said, hey, there's this little video. You guys want to watch this video? I'm not going to promise anything. I don't know what to expect. And from the opening note, literally the opening chord of that music, we were spellbound. I mean, I still get the chills thinking about sitting on that couch watching that movie and the narrative. And it was brilliant. And after that, I mean, I just wanted to fly to London and Paris or wherever he was at the time and hug Barney, because it was so far beyond my expectations. And I was so concerned. Barney, I don't know if I ever expressed this to you, but I was so concerned about, the final product, what it would look like. And you nailed it. I mean, it's amazing.
Dean, was the concern that the camera was in your face, and you were having to, answer questions when you weren't, 100% conscious, or even like totally, sort of frustrated maybe with what your performance and all the other things that go through your mind when you're running a race like this, or was it just like, I have nothing to do with the film, I'd rather just not be part of it?
Barney is a very respectful guy, and he was very, he was respectful of my space, so he wasn't obnoxious. It wasn't a problem accommodating him. But again, I was kind of pushing him away, because I thought, here I am, giving this guy all my time, and it's going to make me look like a fool when I see the final product. It's not going to be well done. It's going to be, it's going to be cheesy. The storyline's going to be superficial, and I'm going to be embarrassed by the final product. So that was going through the back of my head the whole time.
Like so Barney,
some film projects before, shorter film projects, and they haven't always gone that well. So and I didn't know Barney, I didn't know his background. I knew he'd never done a documentary or a movie before, which concerned me, right. Obviously. So that was kind of what was going through my head, yeah.
Well, I'll just jump in, Barney, and ask you, because I don't think, you would have been, would have had a movie if you couldn't have gotten as close as you did to all the runners, because otherwise it would have just been seeing a bunch of people running, and that by itself is not so compelling, right? So, when I watch the film, I think of, Jim McKay, the thrill of victory, the agony of defeat, and you really experience that when you see people dropping like flies, and you're able to, I know you guys only had 2 cameras and a small crew, and you had to, logistically, I want you to talk about that, how you were able to get to everyone, enough to get the drama that you needed to capture to be able to stitch together the story in post-production. But you really, you see everybody at their worst, even though, Dean, you finished, the others 3 didn't. And I got to tell you, at the end of the film, when you see the credits, I think it's Mark, I mean, that I feel so great when you see that he did it again for the 4th time and actually, was able to touch the feet of Leonides. So it's, and even Angela, who ran it again and was able to, ran it twice again and was able to complete the race a 3rd time. So that's just like, you can't help but be inspired by that. But, tell us, the challenges you had actually getting ahead of, to these stations, to meet up with the runners, to get in close to them, to ask them questions when they're like getting their toenails sewn back on and or thrown out, or whatever's happening to them, or their blisters lanced. It's just awful.
Yeah. Well, first of all, thanks for the vote of confidence, Dean. That's really made me feel good.
Have another sip of your beer.
Is that that's why it was so difficult to find you after the race?
Oh, yeah. No, I don't know why.
Boy, did we had to work really hard to get Dean's post-race interview, didn't we? Because you were whisked away from Sparta the following morning, and I then the thing is, Dean, I'm a journalist. I'm always quite a dogged journalist, so I don't give up. Which meant that we tracked Dean back to his hotel in Athens, and we finally got him. I think just before you flew. I think it's when you bought that hat, actually, but I might be wrong on that one.
It's the day I bought this hat. You're absolutely right. It's a very
I remember you coming back, being very pleased with your purchase. So anyway, but the thing is, I don't blame you at all for thinking that, because you're absolutely right. I had never made a film. I was working for Eurosport at the time, so I'd made quite a few TV shorts and so on and so forth. But a full feature documentary is a different process, and that's why Roddy was so important. That's why I needed this guy, because Roddy is a hugely experienced filmmaker. So the 2 of us, you worked very hard over the course of whatever it was, 3 or 4 years, 3 years putting it together. Just to rewind to what you were asking, George, how did we operate? We operated on a very shoestring budget. There was no money in this project apart from what I could raise through crowdfunding. And we had a couple of guys, a fellow you'd know, Tom Chiotis, who you know well, who's I'm sure will be known well to the Greek American community. He came in, and Tom came in as an executive producer and put a little bit of his backing behind it. And we had another guy called Jimmy Phillipson, who's a Brit who I knew from my time in Athens, who was also a runner, had never run Spartathlon, but loved the idea and wanted to. So with those 2 and with crowdfunding, that was basically it. We made it on a shoestring. It was made thanks to Pan and the well-meaning, I suppose, of the people who were involved. I was able to sell the idea well enough to persuade people to come on board on the notion that none of us are going to get rich on this, but we're going to make one bloody good film that we'll all be proud of. And so Roddy was able to persuade. Roddy's a teacher as well, so he got an old student to come over from London, and we roped in a couple of other camera guys in Athens who helped us out, and they did bits and pieces, not a huge amount, but bits and pieces. So it was mainly Roddy and Marius. And of course, we had a problem because we had Marius, the second camera was with Rob Pinnington. which was great. We had a lot of good footage of Rob, but of course, I'm guessing there is a spoiler alert coming. So if you haven't watched the film, just close your ears now. When Rob didn't make it, he was, we obviously had a problem because this was in the middle of the night, and Marius had to go with Rob back to Sparta. So we lost a camera. So we were down to one camera following 3 runners. Dean did have a support crew. So I was ringing Dean's support crew, which was Dimitri, who was brilliant. Mark had no support, so we had no idea where Mark was. And Angie, we did have a number 4, so we kept in touch with her as well. So we were up and down the road with one camera, basically, trying to follow 3 runners who were going at different paces. You know, Dean was ahead, the other 2 were further back, and of course in the middle of the night. So it was awkward, but it was interesting, and we got there. And of course we had the problem of things that things like camera batteries. We had nowhere to charge camera batteries. So there came a point when, thankfully, Marius had gone back to Sparta. I had to make a drive down to Sparta, while leave Roddy and the rest of the guys on the road, drive to Sparta, go and collect some batteries, bring them back. So it was complex. It was very awkward, but you know, we did it. Thankfully, you know, thanks to Pam.
So I know, Dean, you brought up the music, and so Barney, I'm gonna have to ask you that you did something somewhat unconventional, right? So you had your musicians with you during the film shoot, which it sounds like it was an idea that you had even before you went in to the, before you even decided to shoot the film, right? It was just like, look, they're going to be there, and we'll write the score, in real time, if you will. So I forget the name of the drum instrument, but the guitar and the drum is
the djembe.
Okay, the primary instruments.
Yeah.
But, tell us about those guys and how that worked, throughout the film shoot.
Yeah, I mean, it's odd because I'm, as I've said before, I'm a journalist. I'm not a career filmmaker. So I've come to this from a slightly different angle. I used to work in radio, which is obviously very audio based. And it's going to sound a bit odd, but I heard this film before I saw it in my head. I heard it. I knew these guys, a band called Old House Playground. So Trifon Lazos and Andreas Venitantes. And I had known them in Athens, and I had watched them play, and I loved their music. They were kind of Greek blues kind of thing. And I knew I wanted them to do the music. And before I talked to Roddy or anyone else, I talked to Trifon. He was the first person I talked to about this project and said, I want to make this film. Would you be interested in doing the music for it and all of it? And we had a long conversation. He said, Barney, we're absolutely in there. We would love to do it. So it came to the point then when I was discussing with Roddy about the actual shoot. Once I twisted his arm and got him in, it just became apparent that I wanted these guys in the van with us to feel it and to know what we were talking about, so that when and it worked. I mean, they were, apart from the fact that they were composing in the back of the van, which was a slightly bizarre experience, especially at sort of 3 o'clock in the morning when you hear the strains of the future soundtrack going on. They were brilliant. Because they got to know each of the characters. So when we see Angie, they fell in love with Angie. Obviously, everyone falls in love with Angie. They knew what we wanted. They knew who Angie was. There came a point when we finally we were sort of finishing up the music, and there's a part where Dean is on his own, and we needed music for Dean, specifically for Dean, to get him to a certain checkpoint. And I just, I said to them, we need a Dean thing. They knew exactly where he was on the route. They'd met Dean, they knew him, and they came out with this kind of almost spaghetti western, or no, moussaka western theme for Dean, which is it's just beautiful. I mean, that was the benefit of it. So right. It was yes, not normal practice in making films, but well, it worked.
Right.
We were lucky.
Yeah, I don't think people think to do that, but there's definitely an advantage, not just for what you did, but to making any movie where the composer can experience. I mean, yes, they get to see a cut and score to the film, and the director can direct them what they're looking for. But if the composer actually experienced that, I think that they can probably capture better what it is that they want to score. So I thought that was very interesting. I'm going to ask.
George, the thing was, just to add to that, was the interesting thing was, normally when you're making a film, you will cut all the pictures and then you'll ask the musicians or to work around the pictures you've already got. We worked partly that way, but also because they pretty much within 2 weeks of getting back from the race, they had already produced 3 or 4 tracks.
Right.
Which Roddy and I...
If they got to meet the runners, the runners were characters in this film, and it's
exactly.
and it's I have to go back and watch the film again now.
But
it just
meant.
No, I was just going to say, it'd be very interesting now, just kind of think about the music in relation to the runners, because I wasn't doing that the first time I watched the film.
Right, and of course, what we did was then we had these wonderful pieces of music, and we actually said, you know what? We're going to work the pictures to the music. So there's elements where the music works to the pictures, and the other areas where the pictures work to the music.
Right.
So that's an interesting little aspect of the filmmaking. Yeah.
So Dean, tell me, what is it about your physiology that makes you be able to be the kind of endurance runner that you are? And it just seems like you have to have a certain physical makeup to be able to do what you do.
It comes down to, I'm not very bright.
Not your calves?
I'm Greek, and I have, I guess, a Greek physique. When people have analyzed my foot strike, my gait, I pretty much run like an ideal human should run. I strike midfoot. I don't pronate or supinate. I extenuate my body. My arm swings. I have a slight forward lean. So all of these things a lot of them are hereditary. Like your gait is something you inherit from your parents, and throughout my DNA, my parents have always come from Greece. So I think that has something to do with that. They say in long distance running, the best thing you can do is to choose your parents well. So thanks, Mom and Dad.
But what about running in extreme weather? Like, are you better in heat or cold, or does it matter? At certain elevations, does it affect you the way it affects other runners, or not necessarily?
I'm immune to heat. So I can tolerate heat really well. And I think, again, that's coming from the Southern Mediterranean.
Right.
I'm a wimp when it comes to cold because I have no body fat. We know it's been snowing in Athens, so I can't, I couldn't imagine if I was in Athens right now what I would do when there's snow. But heat to me is not a problem. It's just the cold that gets to me.
So, Dean, I'm just going to read something that you wrote in your book and then have you elaborate on it. You said, if you want to run a mile. If you want to experience a different life, run a marathon. If you want to talk to God, run an ultra. So, expand on that a little bit.
I think, ultramarathoning is a very spiritual quest. I think that at a point you leave your body, and I describe this in my book. The human body has limitations. The human spirit is kind of boundless. So to me, it's almost a holy sort of experience doing something like the Spartathlon. It's got like religious undertones. And I think Barney would agree with that. There's more to it than just the running. It was Aeschylus that said, men seek God and seeking find him. So I think it's this quest to push the body beyond all reasonable expectations and kind of to step over the edge where you have these breakthroughs and these profound insights, even though you haven't slept for days and you're on the verge of collapse. That's the best way I can explain it.
I mean, I've heard you say you don't run from pain, you run towards it. Now you kind of embrace it. Kind of maybe goes back to your namesake, your grandfather, who you also write about in the book. And I gotta quote him, because you said his philosophy is, show me a man who's content and I'll show you an underachiever. So do you feel driven and pushed because of your grandfather? I know all runners have run for something or for someone, so everyone is certainly someone who's doing these kinds of endurance runs has to be super inspired by beyond just saying I'm running to stay fit. So it sounds like with you, it's your Greek roots, it's your grandfather, it's your sister, and a lot of the other things that that you're right about and that are emotional to you.
Yeah, I mean, I talked about the hemerothermi, the day-long runners or all-day runners in ancient Greece. That was their vocation. They were foot messengers. And, I try to kind of live my life as a foot messenger in a modern time. So I've stripped away a lot of the modern luxuries. Like I haven't owned a car in over 10 years. I just run everywhere. And I've kind of created this lifestyle around being like an ancient Greek. I mean, I only eat food that I can pick from a tree, dig from the earth, or catch with my hands. So it's a very, basic Mediterranean diet. And I try to live a simple life. And I want to be true to the man I am. And the man I am is just a runner. It's it's nothing really spectacular, but I am a runner. It's who I am. And, there's a famous quote that I admire. It's, find what you love and let it kill you. So I found my love of running. And as you'll see in the documentary, all four runners, whether we crossed the finish line or not, we died a little and we lived a lot. And again, Barney the film is brilliant. You guys captured it so perfectly. The emotion, the highs, the lows, the drama, all of it. You just got to see it. I can't keep explaining it. You just got to watch the film.
So Barney, I just say, I know we're maybe short on time here. I'm going to still have a couple of questions for you and for Dean. And so just sort of as we, finish up here, could you just speak briefly about the poetry in the film and the sonnets that were written and the two actors who you
Sure.
were reading those poems? And
just before
I think it adds a lot. It adds a lot to the film.
Just before I do, I just want to pick up on something that Dean said, and which you've alluded to as well, about the essence of long distance running is that it's very difficult. I've seen many sports films of all sorts of sports, and it's few and far between the ones that really get between the bones and get into the heads. And when I was doing this, and obviously we as I said to you before, we only had 2 cameras, so we couldn't do grand shots. We didn't have the great overhead visuals. We had to keep it tight, and that worked for us as well, because the runner gives nothing away. There's a mechanical motion about running, and yes, you can see someone getting tired, but largely it's one foot in front of the other. And from the outside, if you're watching from a distance, you might not know there's anything wrong or what's going on inside. It's only when you look in the eyes that you really get through into what's happening. And that's what we focused on. And you'll notice if you watch Sparta again, even in the pre-interviews, we are focusing very much on people's eyes to see what is in there and how it's affecting them. So that was one way of getting around the budgetary aspect as well, because we thought, let's keep it tight.
That's probably a good place to talk about
in terms of the poetry.
I'm going to say that's a good place to talk about the poetry, because there is a scene in the film where I think it's Renos doing one of the sonnets, and it's where people are just crashing and collapsing, and they're all on like gurneys, and you really get, you just have this quiet moment in their face, and what he's, what he's speaking to is just that isolation and that,
I love that
empty.
It's pretty much halfway. It's at Nemea, so it's 124 kilometers in, and it was one of those. Well, there were a couple of things at play here in this particular aspect, because I wanted it, and I told Roddy, this has to look like a military war hospital. You know, this has to look like MASH. We really want to show that people are in pain. There's an awful lot going on here. We've got people with air pressure going on, people having medical attention, all sorts. Not to mention just the regular feet problems that are going on. And it just has that aspect. The other thing we wanted to do was obviously Pan. I've mentioned Pan a few times. Pan is mentioned by Herodotus in connection with the run that Pheidippides made. So the Pheidippides, or Pheidippides, depending on your pronunciation, went to Sparta and then ran back to Athens. And on his way back to Athens, allegedly, he sat and had a chat with Pan, which may be the hallucinations that, or out-of-body experience that Dean was referring to earlier, that long-distance runners get. So we wanted to bring Pan in at some point as a character to bring him into this Pheidippides element of the story, so, which is why during that whole sequence you've got the voice of Pan talking about panic and the limbs heavy and so on and so forth. I can't remember it offhand. So he's in there. So I mean, just very briefly, the film is structured like a Greek play. It is broken into 5 acts and very deliberately constructed like that, in a little, you know, dot of the forelock to Aristotle and so on and so forth. The poetry, we brought the poetry because just to go on to
who is A.E. Stallings?
A.E. Stallings.
Yeah.
Well, if you've got some spare money, put $50 on A.E. Stallings to win the Nobel Prize for Literature within the next 20 years. She's an outstandingly brilliant poet. Excuse me, I'm a bad filmmaker. My camera is whizzing around. Alicia is, she comes from Atlanta, Georgia. And she is, so she's a good American girl. She makes a very, very mean mint julep and holds the best Kentucky Derby parties possible in Greece. I got to know Alicia because her husband, John Soropoulos, is a journalist and was editing the Athens News, which I'm sure many people here will know about the Athens News. It's sadly no longer exists, but was a weekly newspaper in English in Athens and obviously had a very, very big following. So John and I got to know each other well. I got to know Alicia well. And when Roddy and I were editing the film, which we started in September 2014. So we spent about 6 months working it, and we couldn't get the Pheidippides aspect. We couldn't get it. It was, or I couldn't get it. It was how can we tell that tale? We know what we want to do. And we went through various aspects. And then I just tried, I talked to, well, basically my wife kicked me and said, talk to Alicia. And I did, and Alicia came on board, and she'd already done some sonnets. She is a very fine poet, and an award-winning poet, and just, well, a beautiful poet.
Yeah,
poet.
Yeah. The poetry and the music.
So when I contacted Alicia, yeah, well, I mean, again, it takes longer. We haven't really got time, I don't think, to go into the whole aspect of how the poetry worked, because it was a long process of collaboration with us. Me talking her through, she would come back with something, I would give her, sometimes we'd send her a clip, she would say, try this, it didn't work. So we went through various phases, but again, like the other guys, once she was on the project, she was very much on the project and got it. She understood what we were trying to do and that liberated her as well, because I didn't want to sort of say, this is exactly what I want, you've got to write within these narrow lines. You have to let the poet be a poet and trust her to do it.
Look, I mean, it's a 60-minute documentary, and you have, there's a lot, you know, that you cover, right? And I think in watching it again, I just was, you know, really impressed, because there is a story, there is a narrative. All the runners are people you care about. You have the music, you have the history, you have the animation, which I thought was very well done with the maps and showing the race. And So it was very clever, and just using actors like Renos to read these sonnets, and have, you know, everyone who championed this movie, you know, and just, you know, did this out of, you know, out of love, really, because no one was getting rich off making this movie, and you know, to have the finished product that you have is really incredible. So I guess I want to just maybe end with these last two questions.
Can I?
Okay, go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to say we were lucky. Sorry, just to stay on the poetry, because it does link. Is that part of this waiting time? It took us 2 years to edit the film, and that was a blessing for us in a sense, because what happened in 2015 was that Greece was suddenly smashed by austerity, and you had the beginnings of the refugee crisis coming in as well. And it felt, particularly with austerity, that the people in Athens, people in Greece were on the back foot. They were on the defense. And so suddenly we almost had a parallel for the invading Persians. So we kind of used that to draw a parallel so that this film would not be simply about something that happened 2,500 years ago, but it's very contemporary. You know, the Athenians, I lived there for 5 years, and I still, you know, in a sense, I'm an honorary Athenian. I still consider it almost my home city. These people, and I extend that to Greece, it shouldn't just be Athens, but I was living in Greece, so I fly the Athenian flag. I was living in Athens. What they've gone through over centuries is not just the Persians. You know, you've got the invading Romans, you've got the Ottomans, you've got the Nazis in the 40s, and there's so many times they have come under this kind of attack, and the people have been in peril. And this austerity in 2015 was the latest incarnation of that.
Right.
And that's kind of one of those things we just wanted to build in there.
That's why I wrote a Sparta's perfect film for this month, you know, what we're showing this month. But just to sort of close out here, two quick questions. Barney, I'll end with you, Dean. Barney, like what can you tell us what were your expectations going into the film, right? So you're there to just record the race and get, you know, let the story unfold as it's going to happen. But I can't help but think that you were like, I want them all to finish. I don't want them all to finish. I want something to happen that you have no control of. So did you have an expectation going into this project?
As I said to you, when I spoke to Roddy, I said the worst thing that can happen is we're going to make a 20-minute film about this. And if we use that as a means to raise some money to make another film, we'll do that. So my expectations going into the week were relatively not small, because I wanted to make a good film. If it was going to be a short film, I still wanted to make a good film, but I didn't expect to make a 60-minute feature. In terms of how it transpired, I mean, I couldn't ask for more, to be honest. You know, we adapted well. The runners we had, I mean, we did have some squeaky moments, it has to be said. You know, when 3 of our 4 runners dropped out and Dean was looking pretty shabby in Tegea, you know, I did want to sort of slip him a helping hand, you know, jump in the back of the van, Dean, we'll get you there, you know.
Well, it's funny, you asked Dean in the film, are you ready to quit? And even though he sounds like he wants to quit, that's what, like, a life comes back to you and you're like, of course I'm not going to quit.
Well, there's a
yeah. Well, that's my bad humor. That was me having a joke, which I don't think Dean really was in the mood for. To be fair, and I apologize for that. But sometimes these things slip through.
So, Dean, obviously, you finished in 34 hours. I forget the exact finish time, under 36, and in the film you don't see. You touch Leonidas' feet. I don't know if you kissed his the camera couldn't be with you 24/7, right? So we see what we see in the film, and I'm sure there's stuff that you shot that didn't make it in the movie that was left on the editing room floor. But obviously the book is an account of your entire race. So what 1 or 2 stories do you want to share that about the race that you experienced that wasn't captured in the film. I think it'd be interesting to sort of finish on that note, because it is truly remarkable that what you've been able to accomplish.
Well, I mean, I think something that was really endearing is that a lot of my relatives showed up along the course to say hi and eat baklava and all kinds of stuff. So I wasn't expecting to have chats with relatives I've never met, and them asking to take photos with their family and meet their daughter and their son, sign a copy of my book for them. That was happening quite regularly. So it was almost comical, because I'm on the verge of dying, as Barney, witnessed firsthand. And all of a sudden, there's my extended family waiting for me, and they're not runners, and they're happy to see me, and they want to chit chat and have a bite to eat. And I've been running for 25, 30 hours, and had to kind of rise to the occasion, because I'd never met these folks, and they have no idea what it's like to run a grueling race like this. And so I put on my best face to meet them. So I thought that was kind of interesting. And then the other thing that thankfully Barney never captured, and I imagine he would have had I given him the opportunity, is I was eating figs, and I had trained eating figs during like 8 or 9 or 10-hour runs, because I wanted to train with these foods I was going to be using during the Spartathlon. And they worked fine. Figs are great energy for a marathon, maybe for a double marathon, but figs over 24 hours are not such a good idea, because why do you eat figs?
I was worried.
Yeah,
I was worried.
If you want to be regular, you eat figs. But what you don't want when you're running an ultramarathon is to be regular. And having consumed probably a pound of figs, it caught up with me. And I'll leave it at that. Thankfully, my crew had toilet paper, and thankfully there's a lot of open space on the side of the road where I can run off into the bushes. But there were some moments where I'm really glad a camera wasn't there.
So
can I just say, to Dean, George, can I just say one thing, which
absolutely.
is to Dean and to the other runners, which is, I thank you. I know you were a little bit worried about what we were going to do, but I really thank you and the other three for having this little leap of faith, because when you're running, and it's happened to me. I remember when I ran the London Marathon, and I had photographers around because I was feeling pretty crap and had to have a stop and so on, and people gathering around to take photos of you when you're really, really feeling bad. It's not what you want. And you've got to trust people, and you guys trusted us to do well. And I hope, what we've tried to do, we have to show you runners at your worst. But I hope we've done that with respect, if I can put it like that, and within the context, not as a cheap line to say how awful it is, but as a part of a context as to why this is so special and what you have achieved. Anyone who finishes the Spartathlon has done something really incredible. I take my hat off to all of you, because I know it's beyond me, but I just want to, say well done and thank you for trusting us to do it. And I hope we've repaid that trust.
Yeah, well, thank you both for making, time to talk to us, and Barney, and to you and Roddy, congratulations on the film. Dean, I know you'll continue to keep running and making all of us Greeks proud. You definitely are a modern Greek hero to all of us. So congratulations to you, and thank you both. And
cheers, guys.
All the best.
Enjoy.
Yamas.